Welcome back to another edition of Market Research. I have with me Tim and Holly, who have just recently learned how to play Netrunner, and I thought we'd do a market research talking about the process of learning the game, and also they are game designers themselves. So why don't you talk real quickly about what games you've made and that kind of thing? Introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'm Tim Keenan, and this is my wife Holly. We made a game called A Virus Named Tom. Holly was basically mostly in charge of the art for the game, and I was in charge of a lot of the programming and design, though we had a lot of contractors. And we've also designed some board games together on the side, which is really fun. I'm playing around with one called Chess the Gathering right now, which we have a digital version. And before that, we had some weird paper prototypes that we used to mess around with. But yeah, and right now we're in the middle of making another game called Duskers, but that's pretty early on.
That's not a board game. That's actual
Yeah.
a video game.
Yeah. Though it was paper prototyped in the beginning, but it's totally different from there.
Yes, I remember the video of that originally. So
Yeah.
what got you two into Netrunner?
So this guy Brian Cronin, he kept talking up the game, and it was just kind of like there must be something about this game that's good because I figured. And also the other thing is that as a couple, a lot of times with a child, we don't have as many game nights. So all the games that I've bought are like 4 or 5 player. And I was starting to be like, we need some 2-player games. And some 2-player games that were competitive at first, weren't working out because chess, I had played so much chess that it was kind of frustrating for Holly because every time we played, it would be like a tutorial where I'd just be walking her through strategy and theory and stuff like that.
Do this. Okay, no, you don't want to do that. You
Right.
want to move that there.
Yes.
Because 10-minute explanation.
Yeah, and so that was not as fun.
Nope.
And then I tried some classic ones like Stratego. I think again fell into that problem of being like
You were just too familiar with it. We
Right.
needed to find games that you didn't have, that you hadn't taken lessons in, and that
Right.
we hadn't played, from the time you were 5.
right. So then we started playing cooperative games. So then we bought Legendary, which was a Marvel deck building game,
Well, the first one we bought was Pandemic.
and Pandemic, right, which is another cooperative game. And then after a little while, like I think I just bought Jaipur, which is a competitive card game. And we had a lot of fun with that. So I was like, okay, we can wander back into the competitive realm if, it's something that I've never played. And so then you were talking about Netrunner, and I was looking for a game that maybe had as much depth as I loved about chess and stuff like that. Like maybe had some of those mechanics. I mean, we both have played like poker, and so I love those elements of like bluffing and stuff like that. And so I think we were at a point where we were like, what's a good 2-player game that we could step into that has like a little bit more depth and that might be fun? And so when you were talking about Netrunner, I got kind of excited about that. So
Okay. Was there anything in particular about Netrunner that interested you? Like, there's a lot of games like this. Like, you could have started playing Magic, or there's a Star Wars collectible card game, and is there anything in particular about Netrunner?
So we have played Magic.
A little bit.
A little bit, mostly online.
Yeah. Well, we started playing online, and I think that sort of tainted our experience with it because we when we started attempting to play with the actual physical cards, we realized really quickly that it was frustrating to actually have to manage moving
Right.
all the cards around when the video game we were used to having it manage all that stuff
Right.
for us. And then just being able to have like a completely open-ended deck that someone could construct. It's like the barrier to entry is kind of hard when
Yeah.
you're really, really new into it. So
Yeah, well, and that's what I think kind of appealed to us because we had recently played the Game of Thrones CC. Well, not a CCG.
The LCG, right?
So there is an LCG, but we had actually played the HBO version of it, which I don't
Right.
think is technically an LCG.
Right,
But-
that's its own standalone.
Right, but the guy had talked about the notion of an LCG, and I was like, wait a minute. So you're telling me it could be a game where there was deck building, but there aren't like a million booster packs out there, and it could be determined that there's only so many, and we could just grow with the game, and that was really appealing, I think, because we both like Magic and we both like these games, but we knew that we weren't going to be core enough to get into all of the booster packs and stuff like that. And so it's just the number of cards is just kind of daunting, and every card has its own little you have to learn all the cards.
Yeah, it becomes a hobby in itself, just building those decks. And
which is cool,
but we just don't have time,
for that. Yeah.
Okay, so you bought the core set, and you started reading the rules and started playing it, and how did that go in general?
You actually did a lot of homework before we even attempted to play. I feel like Tim spent maybe a week or two. He read through, and I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly the order of operations here, but I know he read the entire manual.
Yeah.
And then he spent a lot of time actually watching people play online.
Well, so we live in, and this is interesting to me, like, we live in a world now where there's lots of Let's Plays and YouTube videos and stuff like that. And before, if I got a board game that I was excited about, because there's always, like, when you get a new toy, you're always just like, oh, this is exciting. And I wanted us to be able to play this, because I was really into board games at this moment, because Kubla Khan had just happened, and I was, like, going crazy. So I read the instructions, and then that wasn't enough, so I was just like, so I watched the 5 quick videos that, I don't know, was it Fantasy Flight put out?
Yeah, kind of the tutorial videos they have, or introduction videos.
Actually, I watched those first, and that gave me like a basic gist of the game. And then I read the instructions, so I thought that I knew what I was doing, and then I was looking online.
Then you watched some more extended, like actual entire games. Like you watched.
It wasn't a game. It was a 45-minute tutorial by, and I can't remember who it was by, but it was recommended on like Board Game Geek or something like that.
This was just a YouTube, just a person.
Yeah, it was just two guys kind of explaining and like actually showing how it was done, which was honestly that was the best, because that was like, hey, here's actually how it gets played, and here's all the situations, and I can see them like turning over their ice and actually physically doing things. So that was actually really cool.
Yeah.
And then we sat down to play.
But we didn't play. I thought when we sat down to play, we didn't play according to the recommended first decks, right? Like you,
we didn't.
You switched it up.
Yeah. So you're supposed to be.
So after reading through all that stuff, you're like, this doesn't sound like this sounds too complicated or something.
It's a Shaper and Jinteki is what they recommend.
Yeah, we didn't start with Jinteki.
So we didn't start with Jinteki. We did Hans Bayreuth or whatever.
Yeah.
Because
right.
Jinteki had like a lot of those cards. It was like if this and put a token on that, and I felt like that was going to be like, that's just too many like things to learn at once. Right. So Hans Bayreuth, it was a lot more straightforward. And then I started explaining the rules, and then Holly was just like Holly's brain was just melting. Because there's so much terminology.
Well, it's really hard to just have someone verbalize all that too.
Right.
Like you need to just sort of play.
So then
the way I like to learn anyways, just play through it and then ask questions as we go.
So then we just decided to play, and we were kind of sort of playing the first game. Did we have our hands exposed or no?
We did. We played the first time we ever attempted. We played with the hands exposed, just because I didn't know all the nomenclature that went with the game, because I hadn't studied the rule book like he had. So just in order for me to kind of get an understanding of what everything meant, we played with everything facing up. And then we realized that was not going to, like, you couldn't actually play that way.
Right.
So it was just in order to familiarize myself.
For sure.
Yeah. So obviously it takes away a lot of the bluffing and stuff like that. But what we kind of did was, we played as if both of us were playing either side. So it was like, all right, we'll be the runner, and this is what we'll do on our turn. Now we're going to move over to the corp, and this is what we do on our turn. That's actually,
whenever we play any game, we generally will play exposed, like, face up, whatever it is, so that we kind of will work through problems together at the same time. So if we come across something as on either side, we'll both be able to figure out what the answer is, instead of him playing as one side, asking a bunch of questions that I'm not aware of, and then me, playing that side, and then having to ask the same questions again because we didn't share that information.
Yeah. Well, I think the hard thing in this situation about Netrunner is it's asymmetric. So
what's that? Yeah,
we can't ask the same questions back and forth because the corp and the runner are very different.
Yeah.
So if it had been something like you're playing Gin Rummy, it's like you're mirrored, so like you kind of have the same thing going on. But that makes it a little.
Which is why I think we only played through once, with our hands exposed. Then we realized it wasn't really benefiting us in the way that we were kind of used to when we would start other games.
Yeah.
So just as a learning game, that makes total sense. That's actually an interesting technique. I hadn't heard that before, but I think that that makes a lot of sense. Just like you said, if you're gonna have to ask a question for almost every card anyway. You might as well play face up.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so did you run into any fundamental problems as you were playing? I know the first time I started playing, I was playing a lot of rules incorrectly, but anything like that came up, or yeah.
Yeah, we realized, I don't know how many times we played through, but the corp just kept winning. Like,
No, I think it was the runner.
The runner kept winning. Was it the runner?
Yeah, the runner won every time.
It was completely
Right.
lopsided. There was no chance that the other team could have possibly have won.
Right.
So after, I don't know, we may have played through 5 or 6
Yeah,
times.
we played through 5 or 6 times, and then I kept going through. I actually rewatched that video to make sure that we were playing right, because I thought that maybe like we were doing runs incorrectly or whatever. And there were like a few things, and I knew that we would do a few things wrong. So there were a few things that we knew that we weren't always keeping track of perfectly. Like one was, is it Crypsis or
Probably.
What's the
You put the virus token on and have to take it off.
Oh,
and-
yeah.
Yeah, so we weren't putting the virus we weren't wasting a click to put a virus token on him each time he broke ice. And I think, and I'm not positive, but because the runner we were playing with, the Shaper, almost all the ice like keeps its strength upgrades for
Right.
each piece it goes through. I don't know if we were completely keeping track of that. But then the big one that I just completely missed when we played, that we found out, because I then was like, all right, dude, like the game seems fun, but like the runner always wins, and it's kind of frustrating. And then you and I played, and
Yes, just to recount that really quick, because that was kind of funny, is I'm on my way to work and I get a frantic set of text messages from you saying that the game's unbalanced and that the runner's winning every time. And so I came over to your office at lunch that day, and we kind of worked out some of the issues.
I think the best part of that was that I was texting you at like 9 a.m, and then you were like, oh yeah, like I can come over, and then I was just like, oh, because I had brought in my decks, but I think I had forgotten like all the
token.
all the
tokens and
miscellaneous
stuff.
pieces
Yeah.
and stuff, and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot that, and you're like, oh no, I have all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I kind of always have my Netrunner stuff. I didn't usually carry a bag with me, but since playing Netrunner, I always have a backpack and it's full of Netrunner stuff. So that's been a slight change in my life.
But that was pretty awesome, because I think I was like, I think I messaged you. I'm
Yeah.
like, I've got like an office visit. Like I was able to schedule one today at noon. It's great. And the big one there was that the runner as the runner we're drawing a card every turn.
Yeah, because the mandatory draw you only take as a corp, but
Right.
you just kind of got that part confused.
And I think one of the problems is that in a lot of the tutorials and videos and stuff like that, they go over all the rules, and they even go over. I guess they even go over the setup, but they weren't playing like a game, like back and forth. So like things involving setup, like I remember at the beginning we were like trying to figure out how many credits we got, and it was like a little bit like we were like, how does that work? Because it was like the setup stuff wasn't
Yeah,
like,
we were a
super
little
clear.
confused. I think we didn't know. We weren't positive if we started off with the same amount of credits as the corp and the runner.
And then the other thing was that there's nowhere like on the card it doesn't have like it says everything that you can buy, but it doesn't have like a turn order. Like, corp,
Yeah.
draw a card. Like most games
I
come
see.
with that. Like Magic has phases and stuff like that.
Right.
And yet again, that's another reason the asynchronous nature of the game can bite you, because it's like, oh, like you're used to like, in Magic it's like draw a card, then play whatever. So like when the corp draws a card, like at the beginning of the runner's turn, they draw a card. So
I
that
think
did unbalance it, but it still seemed like until we rebuilt the deck, like
Yeah.
you gave us that built deck, and then the corp finally started winning. But without
Yeah,
that,
so to explain that, basically we played the Jinteki Shaper matchup, and it's always interesting when I go back and play core, because I've been playing my custom decks with all the expansions for so long, and the core corporation did not have that much money. It was really hard to get money as the core corp.
yeah.
So I kind of put together a Wayland deck that helped to mitigate that problem a bit, and I think that seemed to help
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah,
Yeah, then the corp was
that
like
was instantly more fun.
it was instantly more fun, and then the corp started winning like a bunch, and so then we were just like, so then I went to the base Wayland deck, I think.
Well, then we also kind of discovered that that first runner, I forgot what the Shaper.
The Shaper
Yeah,
was
cheap.
kind of
Kind of boring.
Like,
because there wasn't much you could do. You just sort of had to wait for the right cards to come along. And
Sure.
I think Aesop's Pawn Shop is fun, but like
but you had to get it. That's the thing. Like you had to wait for the right card to come
Right.
along, and there's only like 2 or 3 of those in the entire deck. So
and it was just a matter of like there wasn't any. I guess the thing was is that it's not that it was. It's not boring, but it's just straightforward.
well, and I think that's
Sure.
why they want you to start with it, right? 'Cause
Right,
it's
which
not
makes
as
sense.
complicated.
It's not
but
as complicated. But then when she played as as
Criminal?
Noise or whatever,
Oh, Noise,
yeah.
the
and you were
anarch.
able to start doing the virus
That was a
stuff,
lot
and
more
that was
fun.
kind of more fun. And then when you were playing as the other
Gabe?
guy, the criminal,
yeah,
Yeah,
and we each
keep
took
real.
turns playing the
Right.
runner and the corp. So to make sure that
Yeah.
that individually we weren't missing something.
right? Like if one of us was just better at being the corp or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when we were playing as the other runner, Jacob or something, the criminal,
Yeah, there's
Criminal.
Gabe.
that was cool because then there was like a lot of stuff about running on HQ, and then he's got the card in there that
Yeah.
you can run on archives, and that counts as HQ. So I had to adapt my strategy to that.
Yeah.
Because when we were, as the runner, as the corp wasn't making enough money, you could just take so many pot shots at R&D and get a free agenda that way.
Yeah.
And there was just so many ways to just mess with the corp, right? But yeah.
And that's Shaper in core especially was known for having this big rig strategy, it was called. I mean, it still is a thing, but where you just build up a really nice, expensive set of programs and hardware to support them, and then you just can get in really cheap and sometimes free into the servers.
Yeah.
And it's a viable strategy, but it's slow and there's not much subtlety to it.
Right.
Whereas opposed to Anarch and Criminal in the core set, you had a lot more tricks, like Sneak Door beta you're talking about getting into through archives. There's a lot more things that like just make you feel like a hacker and
Right.
you manipulate servers. And so yeah, I know what you mean. Since then, the game has definitely expanded out a lot more, and that's not really an issue anymore. So I had 2 more questions for you. They're very similar. First is, what were some things that you really liked about the game that you thought would,
This is why it was difficult for us
Just a
to
second. Let me go
get together with
It's
a
fine.
group of friends
Get
and
Dora
play.
started.
We got to get a new episode of Dora going, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. See,
Okay.
this is another reason we wanted Netrunner, is because I was like, we could maybe play a game in an episode of Dora.
All right, yeah, no, it's about the same. 20 minutes or so? Yeah, that lines up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I was gonna say was, what are some things you really like about the game that it appeals to you and so on, and then what are some things that you don't like, or that it either at the start when you're learning or just going forward?
I think that learning the game, I feel like they, from a design perspective, and this might not be true, but I feel like there were a lot of places where they didn't need it to be so complicated, and it is. Like, I feel like I understand that it's good to have different terminology for different things. Like, okay, I've got a grip, and I've got a,
right.
But like when you just say, like in Magic and a lot of games, it's like your discard pile, right? And you could just say the runner's discard pile versus the corpse discard pile. And I know that doesn't make it as much part of the fiction, but at least when you're learning it, it's a lot easier. Because sometimes when it's like, you draw a card and it's like, oh, go through the heap or the stack or whatever, you're just like, it's just one extra step in your brain to like translate that into the real world. And so like that, there's just a lot of terminology that they use, especially because it's asymmetric. And I also wonder sometimes if some of the things couldn't have been done in like a different way. Like they're trying to, and maybe not. I mean, like things like the corp draws and the runner doesn't. To me, like that's fine. Once you learn that rule, it's totally fine. But it's yet another rule, and I'm wondering if there were like not other ways that they could have, balanced that out, like made it so that everyone draws a card. However, in another way, the corp has an advantage or disadvantage. So it's like I feel like there's a lot of places in the game where it almost feels like one more like design iteration could clean up some things. I don't know. Maybe it's not true. It's hard.
That's a really interesting, that point specifically about drawing a card, because what that's for is really just to prevent stall tactics, which the corporation is the only one that would really benefit from any stall tactics.
Right.
So that's what that rule is for. And it can be seen as an advantage, but it can also be seen as a disadvantage, depending on what you draw as a corp.
Yeah,
So
because if you've got a handful of agendas,
right.
and
No.
you just keep drawing agendas, that can screw you, which is
So
fine.
it is another kind of asymmetric thing. And I know what you're saying, where like it seems like both players should be able to draw, but that would give the runner a big advantage.
It's not really that it seems like they both can draw. I'm just saying that there are some rules.
Right. It's an exception, sort of.
Yeah, there are just the more exceptions that you add on, and later on, like now, it's not a big deal. So maybe that's just something that's just part of the game. Is it like, you know what? There's maybe a better way to learn the game than we learned it. But I would honestly say that if you hadn't recommended it so strongly,
when if you hadn't actually played with each other,
and then we hadn't played with each other, if I had just picked it up on a shelf and we started playing it, we probably would have abandoned it.
Yeah.
And I really
mostly
like
because of the complexity.
Well, because we didn't realize what we were doing wrong, and that really changed the outcomes of the game. It made it so that it felt unbalanced because one was at the core. I can't remember which one. The runner kept winning.
Yeah, and in the core, in Legendary that we play, which is a co-op game, that feels unbalanced too because there's only two. I think the way that it works is it's 2 to 5 player, and for 2 players it's just way too easy, and for 5 players it's really hard. And so we always win that one. However, because it's co-op, like that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, and we can just futz with rules to make it harder. But when it's versus, it's very difficult when the game seems unbalanced because then, you know, it's like, the game becomes pointless, right?
Yeah, and it's not even. It was like there was a wide margin between win and loss. It wasn't like
it wasn't like more. It wasn't like
we were like, how could that other? There was no way you could have won. You stood no chance. So I think.
But that was because we were playing wrong.
We were playing
But that's
wrong,
also because there's a lot of like special cases for each side, and is an asymmetric game. But that's like you know, just as a criticism, that's I feel like we are like core enough players that if that was an issue for us, that's an issue. Like if it was like, you know, if it was like my mom and my dad playing and they had that issue, I would be like, well, that may not be an issue. But I feel like we play enough games that like for us to stumble on stuff like that means that the learning curve is pretty steep.
And I think that you just made a really good point that this is really only a problem that would come up in an asymmetric game, because if it was symmetrical, even if you had the same decks to that point, some imbalance would be imbalanced on both sides, presumably. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
So what were some positives that came out of this? What were some things that anything you thought was really cool about the game, different?
Now we think it's really cool. Now that we are really playing by the right rules and
Is there any particular mechanic that
My favorite part is probably, I think, it's probably the strongest part of the game, which is the mind games, right? Mm-hmm. Like the fact that you might have a trap there, you might not have a trap there, like you haven't rezzed your ice, so there's partial information. Like that's always the most fun because there's a lot of tension in this game. Like when I'm the corp, I'm always like, damn it, they're gonna run right through this. Like they're not gonna fall for this bluff. Like they can see right through me. And then when I'm the runner, you know, I have this mentality of like, well, I do feel like I can get through, and I feel much more aggressive. But I also feel like, you know, I don't know what they're laying down for me, and is that a trap? And you know, so it's like on both sides, the lack of information on the runner side and the fact that you have more information on the corp side creates all this tension. That's really fun. And I think one of the things we were doing incorrectly at the beginning was we were playing too conservatively. So we would put something like, what is it, Datapad? Or
Pad Campaign.
Pad Campaign.
And protect it.
We would protect Pad Campaign.
Right.
We would protect like all sorts of things, and we'd just be layering ice. And by the time we had so much ice, the shaper could run through it all because they'd have a rig that was awesome. But we didn't like think about, and I did sometimes like throw down, you know, an agenda really fast to get it out there. But we didn't really think about things like, oh well, if I throw down this ice and they don't have any breakers out right now, they might have it in their hand and they might be able to run, but odds are pretty strong against that. So I think we were playing aggressively as the runner, but we were playing too conservatively as the corp.
Yeah.
So like now as the corp, you know, I adopt a strategy that's much more loose. It's much more like, you know what, I might lose with this method, but at least it's very aggressive, and like if, you know, there's a path to victory there.
I think you identified something important, which is playing the corp well. There's a lot more subtlety involved. I think it's harder to play the corp very well at the same level as runner, especially in the core set.
Yeah, the runner, it seems really straightforward. It's like, I'm going to run on things. If you bring something out, and as long as I don't think it's a trap or I can absorb it, whatever damage, because I've got a bunch of cards in my hand, then I'm going to attack. And usually we just take pot shots while we're waiting for an agenda to come out. You just take pot shots at R&D and HQ until
they put
something to stop you. Yeah. So.
And that gets mixed up a lot in the later packs where playing the runner is a lot about just assessing risk and knowing if it's risky to run and what the worst things are. And so the game definitely got a lot more, I think, dangerous after the core set. Okay, so I have one last question for both of you. So first of all, Holly, corp or runner?
I think I tend to play runner. After you gave him that, it was a corp deck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he was really having fun playing that deck. So
okay.
I think we probably played that a good, I don't know, half dozen times with him playing just as that role and me trying the other runners.
Right.
And then we got kind of comfortable. Like then I feel like I was like, well, I kind of like my runner set.
Yeah.
And you liked your new set. So
Are you a company man, Tim?
I am. I think I don't know. It seems like I feel like there's more scheming going on. I feel more like this horrible person that's that's just trying to lay out traps and screw someone, and that like really fits.
Your normal lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, generally that's what I try to do, is harm people.
Sure.
So I think it's not only fun because I feel like you're building something, but then it's also fun because you have that information and you're trying to deceive. And I think that's really fun for me. So I do enjoy running because you get a more aggressive feel, and I like that. I like feeling like I'm in control and that I am on the offensive. But as the corp, there's like more things like to kind of worry about and manipulate. So I think it's fun to play the puppet master there, And if they like fall for your trap, you get like a little joy. You're just like,
right. Orchestrating their demise is always satisfying.
Yeah.
All right. Any last words? Anything else you want to get mention that you haven't mentioned? We've been talking for a while, so it's totally normal if you don't have anything else to add.
I'm still conflicted about, I don't know if we had played the game starting with in the order that they had recommended.
Oh, with Jinteki?
Yeah, I wonder if our initial kind of, we were playing incorrectly at first, but I wonder if our initial evaluation of, of that runner being kind of boring and that court being kind of straightforward,
Well, we didn't, because we went with hands by ride, there weren't any traps.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like if you're laying down a card, generally, it's safe to run on it. And then Jinteki totally, with Snare. And not only that, but Snare helps with the R&D, because we were also poaching R&D, willy-nilly. Because the Shaper also has that eye, Maker's Eye.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's running on R&D just becomes the thing to do. So with Snare, that helps you a little bit. And with, what's that other one? The
Project Junebug?
Yeah, Project Junebug. So that's another one that really wrecks them. So so I feel like as the corp, you wouldn't feel... I feel at the beginning playing the corp, since you don't play aggressively, those things would push you into a more aggressive posture naturally. So I think maybe that's why they have you play with those.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's
I think maybe my evaluation was a little harsh. I do think that if we had played it on our own, and then I had figured out... Because when we were playing with the runner, even though the runner was always winning, it wasn't that we weren't having fun. It's just that it was slanted. So it's as soon as we had figured out those rules... And I think I was having enough fun with it that I would have, looked it up and figured it out or whatever. Maybe.
Oh, we did. I mean,
we did
we kept trying to figure out what we were doing wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And you eventually did. Yeah, Netrunner is the type of game where there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of weird terminology. And I think the people that get into it, they see the appeal of it from the start. They see the potential. That's what happened to me. I think everyone plays Cryptus wrong initially. That's just part of learning the game.
Yeah.
But you see the potential enough, and you just want more. And that led me to where I'm making internet videos about the game.
Yeah. Well, then that's the thing is that I'm really happy.
On it. I mean, it's interesting because the game with the even with the the tutorials that they've made and the the really it's a thick rule set book that they provide. Like even beyond that, you still have to go and rely on that kind of community of people that are already playing to really instruct
I
you
look
in how to
I look
play.
up cards all the time, which is another pot shot. I really like the game, but it's another pot shot that I would take. It suffers from what Magic suffers from, where like you got to go on a forum because of the way that something is phrased, and then there's an official ruling of it because people can be hyper competitive about like what's the definition of accessing a card versus whatever, and I understand that. But that's another thing is that like we definitely like played several cards, and then like I would look I now as a habit before we play with a deck I go through them all, and if anything's confusing I look it up. But at least the community is out there and you can do that.
Yeah, it's just interesting that the game relies so heavily on the community, as a game maker or someone that's just making anything interactive and trying to figure out how to guide people through their first several experiences without giving up. Like that to me that's a really interesting problem.
Right.
I don't know if I have an answer to how to
I think
perfect
a digital version of that is like Minecraft, like or especially early on in that game, the wiki was such an important aspect of it, and continues to be.
And with digital games, you can force things, right? You can be like, you can't draw that card.
Right.
Like, that's just not what's going to happen. But
there's no rules interpretation.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So, and I understand why people are so anal on the forums, because if there are tournaments and stuff like that, there have to be the actual way you can use
stuff matters.
Right, yeah.
Okay, let's finish this up. So that was I think the third market research episode. I call them episodes, and that was Tim and Holly. So thanks for joining me, and hopefully we'll see you at a tournament soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and thanks for introducing us to the game. We really like it.
It's
It's probably our most frequently played 2-player game now.
Yeah,
awesome. Glad to hear. All right, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.